I'm going to demonstrate how I get my dusky finishes on my tanks. I use a two-step process. My first thing I do is to airbrush, usually the lower portions of the vehicle, which is where the dust will build up the most. And then once I do that, I'll apply dry pigment onto the remaining parts of the vehicle to give it more of a layered look. For the airbrushing, I use two different methods. One is to take just like a dust-colored paint, I like Tamiya Buff, and thin it heavily with thinner, and then make multiple passes along the vehicle. Other method is to use a aftermarket product like Africa Dust Effects from AK Interactive, also thin, and I'll show both of those. So first, I've got a really thin mix of Tamiya Buff here. You want to go slow because at first it'll go on almost clear, and before you know it, it's going to pigment up. So you can really overdo the model if you go too hard on this. So you want to concentrate on the lower parts of the vehicle, because that's where the dust is going to build up the most, and just make multiple light passes across it.
How much pressure?
About 20 to 25 psi. It varies sometimes, especially for the dust effects. The method with the Tamiya Buff is easier to apply. It's more forgiving. This stuff will clog your airbrush up in a heartbeat if you're not careful. You really gotta thin it right, and you gotta constantly keep shaking it up, agitating it. For the dust effects, I'm using their white spirits, but I think turpentine would probably work. I've tried just the white spirits. For the Tamiya Buff, this is Tamiya thinner.
What's your ratio? Thinner and paint?
It's hard to tell.
Okay.
Probably for the buff here, you probably want probably 1 part paint, 5 part thinner. Really thin. And it doesn't. You want to make. Just the key to this is to not go too fast. Let it set up a little bit in between. You can really wash out your model if you're not careful. So when it's going on, it looks like you're not doing anything. Dropping it here. See, it's starting to come in a little bit. Yeah, that's basically that. I meant to do just one side with this and the other side with the other method, but that's all right. I'll go ahead and switch over. So this is how I started off dusting my models. My M10 here was done with this method, and then a few months ago I started trying the AK Interactive stuff, and it's a little bit harder to use, but I like the effect more, so I've been using that a lot more recently. Alright, this is with AK Interactive Africa Dust Effects. Alright. This stuff goes on heavier. If I haven't already clogged up my airbrush, I have.
that stuff is really, really, really heavily pigmented. It doesn't
Yeah.
stay in the carrier for very long at all. Once you shake it up and let it sit there for 2 minutes, and it'll start settling out.
Yeah, this method is a lot more difficult, but I like it because it's more forgiving. You can go back with like a Q-tip and you can take off pigment a lot easier. Like on this Tiger here, on the road wheels, I applied it and I let it sit overnight, and I came back the next morning and thought, man, that's really too heavy. So I just took Q-tip and I was able to rub it away and get that effect there, and I was really sold on this method after that.
It's an enamel, and you can reactivate it within a day or two.
Yeah. You can use, I use Tester's enamel thinner for that.
Yeah, I wouldn't use that white spirit on it. You probably strip the thing down to the plastic doing that.
All right, let's see if this works again. Okay. Nope, that was heavy.
But again, the good thing is you can wipe it off whenever you're done.
Yeah. Yeah, despite the difficulties I've had, I've used this stuff probably on 5 different projects, and about half of them went perfectly smooth. Half of them it took like all day to get dust on them.
Right.
It kept jamming up the airbrush. I'll let that set up a little bit and I'll do the dry pigment. Right, typically I'll spray my dust on, and I'll probably give it a day or at least a few hours, and then I'll go back and I'll apply dry pigment to the model. And these are usually the last things I do. I usually wait till I've already constructed the base, I've got my model on the base, and then I'll apply the dust, because I like to get the dust on the groundwork as well, because I think it helps blend in the model more. So these are usually the very last things I do. And I don't get very fancy when I apply the dry pigment. I literally just take a dedicated brush. I will sometimes mix different colors of pigment together, depending on where this vehicle would be set in. And I, just brush it on. I blow away the excess. And I feel it gives this coupled with the airbrush pigment gives a good layered look. And the dry pigment kind of gives it's nice and soft. And just helps add a great deal of detail. Now, this is just a little test piece, obviously.
And do you use anything afterwards to fix the dry pigment, or just leave it?
No, I find that just as dry. Now for dusting, I usually don't use a fixer, but for instance, on this vehicle, when I did the tank tracks, I did use a fixer. I used Tester's enamel as a fixer for the tracks.
Does it change the color line?
It does. It makes it lighter. It makes it a little bit lighter. It goes on really dark, but it lightens up a lot, and sometimes I have to go back and adjust it. But for just basic applying dust on the tanks, I usually don't use a fixer.
So if you periodically, some new strikes me out, like I got around with them, take the household dust off, if you eventually have to reapply.
No, I don't really see. I haven't. This is the first one I did, and this is about 2 years ago, and it stays pretty well.
take a
Yeah.
little brush and
Yeah.
Like
other dust off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It has a whole lot more adhesive property than like Pastels does.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot more
It
adhesive
does.
property.
It's kind of surprising. Like on one of my vehicles, my dad was actually messing around. He actually touched the hood, and nothing came off.
Yeah.
You know, I was kind of pretty surprised. I was like, no, but nothing came off.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. No big fingerprint or anything. But
Which is one of the main differences between that stuff and Pastels is the how well they stick to.
yeah, I used to use Pastels, but this stuff works so much better.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's pretty much it. This is my M10 here. I did with the old method of the thin Tamiya buff and just dry pigment on it. My Tiger here is a good example of using the North Africa Dust Effects and this North Africa dust on it.
Excellent. That it, boss?
That's it.
All right. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Welcome.